exciting match that
I'm still reeling.
I was about to say, I still haven't gotten over that match. That was too exciting. But unfortunately, we can't spend all day focusing on that match. We have other top 16 matches to get to you. So you will be joined by us again for this next top 16 match. So I hope you guys are ready.
Yeah, it's a double dose of Atlanta here. So we're ready for the next match in the Cinderella bracket. I think this is a Emerald Steel Mirror, so it's going to be grindy and it's going to be fun. Yeah, I'm excited.
Let's get right into it. All right, we have Alexandru and Franklin both on Emerald Steel. This matchup can be really interesting because there's a couple key components in these decks. They can do multiple different things. One of those things is discard. Usually going first, I think the Emerald Steel player wants to be playing a more discard role, playing cards like Cursed Merfolk, forcing the opponent to challenge these Cursed Merfolks when they quest. When you challenge a Cursed Merfolk, you have to discard a card. And the idea behind that is to keep the resources out of your opponent's hand so that they can't respond to you, and then once they don't have any resources in hand, you have a bunch of characters that are questing for a lot of lore and can push you up to 20. But if you're going second, you have quite a few reactive cards that you can play also in Steel, like Let the Storm Rage On, and other cards to slow down your opponent's board. But we see Franklin playing around this, playing the Ursula Deceiver, getting to see all of the songs in Alexandru's deck and getting his pick of which one he wants Alexandru to discard.
Yeah, several different options here. You know, one thing to keep in mind on this that is inkable versus uninkable, but you know what? Plenty of inkables in this hand. So three good options. One, Sudden Chill, which forces Franklin to discard a card from his hand, or two cards from his hand. Next, Let the Storm Rage On, which is a removal spell, same as Strength of Raging Fire, but doesn't require you to have any characters on the board, but also gives you a card off of it. So it will remove the Merfolk or any other 2 willpower character on the board, but then also give Alexandru a card. So it's a card that oftentimes, I don't know, you want to play early game to give yourself more options.
Yeah, I definitely like the discard of Let the Storm Rage On because, like you said, it can banish the Cursed Merfolk and also draw Alexandru a card. The Strength of Raging Fire, you can only play if there are other characters on board because it only deals damage based on the number of characters on board. You could play it if you wanted to. It's not going to do
there would be no strength to that Raging Fire.
Much. Yeah, there's no strength to that Raging Fire. But we do see Alexandru play a Bucky, which gives me an idea of what kind of Emerald Steel deck he's playing. There's usually 2 variants of this deck, one that plays Bucky, one that doesn't. Bucky is a 2-cost inkable 1/1 that says whenever another Floodborn character is played, the opponent must discard a card. So Alexandru is going to be playing a lot of Floodborn characters, probably in Steel, if I had to guess, in order to force Franklin to discard cards. And Steel has quite a lot of really strong Floodborn characters, to be honest. We see the Tinkerbell Giant Fairy in his hand. We also see a Jafar Dreadnought. Both of those characters being what I like to call challenging characters, the characters that can sit on the board because they want to challenge whatever the opponent is exerting. And Franklin, having gone first, playing things like the Cursed Merfolk, wanting to quest with it as much as he can, is going to slow down Alexandru is going to slow down Franklin being able to play some of these cards. But first, he plays an also scary card, also an enchanted card, the Ursula Deceiver of All. Very beautiful card. Ursula, Deceiver of All, as we can see that Franklin is demonstrating very well, can sing a card twice. When she sings it the first time, it does its normal thing, goes to the discard, and then you're able to play that card from your discard again one more time. So he decides to sing Let the Storm Rage On, dealing 2 damage to Alexandru's Ursula, and drawing a card, then dealing another 2 damage to the Ursula, banishing it, and drawing a second card.
It's a fantastic card to sing. I mean, the 2 cards off that card are amazing, and removing that Ursula Deceiver of All is just critical in this point. You know, one thing we talk about, especially in the mirrors or with mid-range builds, is people have to figure out pretty quickly whether you're the aggressor or whether you have to be the control player. Franklin is clearly angling to be the aggressor here, playing his high lore character early and trying to quest as much as possible, going up to 8 lore early, and Alexandru taking on the role of the control player. Here we have a Floodborn come down. It's that Jafar Dreadnought you identified earlier. A great card to get on the board because it can challenge when it banishes an opposing character, it draws you a card. And because it's a Floodborn, Bucky forcing a discard from Franklin, and here we'll see the hand pressure start a little bit, I think. Yeah,
so this is actually a really interesting play because we see the Ursula Deceiver of All is still on board on Franklin's side, and he's holding onto a Sudden Chill. There's also a Prince Prince John sitting next to it. Prince John is a 1/2 with 2 lore that has the ability that says when your opponent discards a card, you get to draw a card. And we see this happening
in action
to
right
Franklin.
now.
Currently, he plays a card called Friar Tuck. Friar Tuck says that the player with the most cards in hand has to discard a card. So we're playing Friar Tuck, forcing Alexandru to discard a card because he had more cards in hand. We're drawing a card off of Prince John, triggering when Alexandru discards a card, and then we're singing Sudden Chill with Ursula so that Sudden Chill gets played twice, and Sudden Chill forces Alexandru to discard a card. So Alexandru discarded 3 cards that turn, drawing Franklin 3 cards as well.
Yeah. I mean, you said it. I mean, this game is Franklin is clearly in driver's seat with the engine on the board, and there it is. Alexandru saying, there's no way I can come back for this. That was fast, Brandon.
That was an extremely fast game, and honestly is kind of how I think these mirrors usually go. The Emerald Steel deck, I mean, its goal is to discard and sing songs, and whoever can get that Ursula Deceiver of All to be on the board and stay on the board first, especially if you're able to discard your opponent's hand and get the Prince John engine running where you're drawing cards while your opponent's discarding cards, I mean, you just have a major advantage over your opponent at that turn. We talk about how important resources are in this game, and cards in hand being one of those. Forcing your opponent to get rid of all your cards and then drawing that many cards instead is just double being hit from both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. The hand pressure there was real. Pooh, stay up here.
Pooh's trying to leave.
He was blown away by that, how fast that game was. Let's go on to game 2 and see if Alexandru can take it back and go to a game 3.
Yeah, we talked about how important being on the play is here, and so on this game, Alexandru will get to go first. And we'll see if he can make the most out of that.
So, Alexandru didn't have a turn 1 play. Alexandru didn't have a turn 1 play before, and really wants to have this Robin Hood on the board does something important. We identified that he is playing the Bucky deck, and Robin Hood there is a shift target. If Alexandru is able to play the early Bucky, he can get that discard going early by shifting Robin Hood on turn 3. So it's an interesting turn 1 play, and I think it's one that Alexandru's happy to have. Franklin going with not the aggressive opening he went with last time with Merfolk and its 2 lore, but going with Captain Hook, more control type card. Captain Hook has Forceful Duelist, has Challenger 2, enabling him to challenge into things, and with 2 willpower often can survive a 1 willpower or 1 strength character. But an answer to the Robin Hood if he chooses to quest with, or if Alexandru chooses to quest with it.
Yeah, I love Forceful Duelist as a 1-cost card going second because it is a reactive card. Now Alexandru can't quest with any of his characters, or else he knows that it will be challenged and banished by the Captain Hook, so it sort of freezes what Alexandru can do. We do see an Ursula Deceiver being played to look at Alexandru's hand for any songs, and unfortunately for Franklin, he doesn't hit any songs, but he's going to study Alexandru's hand a little bit to make sure that he knows what is coming. Now that you mentioned it last, Liam, did Alexandru go first last game? He was the higher seeded person. Did he just miss a 1-drop? And then
I think he did. I don't remember, but I think he did. But it makes sense based on the seeding. Sudden Chill into the Inkwell. Songs are a lot less appealing in hand when your opponent's playing Deceiver. But here comes Morph, a fantastic shift target. And again, we see some Floodborns in hand, or Floodborn characters in hand. So if that Morph stays on the board, then Bucky can get that engine going. Franklin, however, with a couple removal cards, knows what's in Alexandru's hand at this point. And so probably not likely to let that Morph stick around too long.
Yeah, and Franklin, having seen Alexandru's hand, yeah, he should know what might be shifted onto this Morph, which is sort of where Morph's strength is, right? Morph is a card that you can use any character to shift onto, or you can shift any character onto Morph. And so normally that is really good because your opponent doesn't know what to expect. They have to play around quite a few Floodborn cards they can expect you to have, but Franklin being able to look at Alexandru's hands should know exactly which Floodborns he is looking to shift on top of. It's still beneficial to Alexandru to do this, though, because of the Bucky on board, forcing Franklin to discard a card if a Floodborn character is played. See Franklin thinking over his next play. Not sure if he wants to quest with the Ursula Deceiver or not. Or potentially sing a song. He could be singing Sudden Chill.
Could be. There's a lot of thinking going on here. You know, we do see Smee go to the Inkwell. Smee is more of an aggressive card with its 2 lore in this deck, but in this case, turning into ink to play Ursula, Deceiver of All. It's a card we're all familiar with at this point, and Franklin does have songs to sing with it. He also has seen Alexandru's hand, and he knows Alexandru doesn't have, or at least didn't last turn, have any removal available. A lot of characters in there, so knows that the Ursula is fairly safe unless Alexandru draws an action that he needs to remove that Ursula. And here's the shift into Tinkerbell. The Bucky, because Tinkerbell is a Floodborn, Bucky triggers, forcing Franklin to discard a card. A fantastic card to play in turn 4. This is a very controlling character. A Tinkerbell does 1 damage to all of your opponent's characters when it comes into play. But then it serves as a big threat on the board. When she challenges and banishes another character, she can deal 2 damage to another of your opponent's characters, potentially allowing her to remove 2 characters at once.
Yeah, and she definitely can do that after being played, because all of Franklin's characters have 3 or less willpower. They're all going to take 1 damage after the Bucky resolves. So when Tinkerbell got played, Alexandru gets to decide whether or not the Bucky ability triggers or the Tinkerbell ability triggers first. We choose the Bucky ability trigger, forcing Franklin to discard a card, and then now you can see all of the damage is put on all of the characters, and now all of them have 2 or less willpower, meaning that if Franklin exerts a character, Tinkerbell will be able to challenge and banish any of them and then ping the other one for 2 damage, banishing them as well.
It certainly makes singing a song with that Ursula a lot less appealing.
Yeah, it's definitely, I like how Alexandru played this for that exact reason. You know that when you see the Ursula Deceiver of All, Franklin likely has a song that he wants to sing, but now he's saying, look, if you sing this song, you will be punished for it, because unless you can get rid of this Tinkerbell Giant Fairy off of the board this turn, you can expect our Alexandru to challenge into the Ursula Deceiver of All and then take out either the Ursula Deceiver or the Captain Hook Forceful Duelist as well.
And there are options available for Franklin. Strength of Raging Fire here would be sung twice, dealing 3 damage twice to Tinkerbell. So we know Franklin does have options available to deal with the Tinkerbell, but let's see what he chooses to do.
He's thinking really hard over this. He must have a very difficult decision ahead of him. Considering singing with Ursula, and he decides to sing Let the Storm Rage On. So he'll be able to do 2 damage twice. He deals it once to Robin Hood with 2 willpower, so that will banish Robin Hood. And it'll deal 2 damage to Tinkerbell. He'll also get to draw 2 cards off of that, because Let the Storm Rage On lets you draw a card when played. And it was, of course, sung twice by Ursula Deceiver.
I bet the card draw was the biggest benefit there for Franklin, clearly looking for something.
Yeah.
And he did draw the Strength of Raging Fire, which I bet he drew off that. Clearly he drew it off that card, otherwise he used it earlier. So drawing into the answer he needed to remove the Tinkerbell. Fantastic play, and sometimes you get what you need.
This is such an interesting matchup because we are quite a few turns into this game and not a single person has gained lore except for just now Franklin being able to clear the board. And I want to go back to what we said in game 1, where in this mirror match, the player that can get an Ursula Deceiver to stick usually has a great advantage, and we see why. Being able to sing a song twice is really, really strong, especially with the steel songs available to you that can damage and remove characters from play. It allows you to get rid of your opponent's board and give you more freedom to quest with your characters, since your opponent won't have a way to retaliate.
A fantastic response here from Alexandru, though. It's a perfect turn 5 play. Beast Tragic Hero. First, it's another Floodborn, triggering Bucky, forcing Franklin to discard a card. And one thing, Franklin, not only has he played a bunch of his cards, he's got a few left in hand, but he needs to keep inking if he wants access to some of his higher ink cards. But then Beast, a great ability on the board, unless it has any damage, and we'll talk about it anyway, even though it's gone back to the hand. But if it doesn't have any damage on it, it draws an extra card for Alexandru each turn. So able to sit there and give Alexandru, additional card advantage each turn. But of course, being sent back to his hand there with a Mother Knows Best, one of the few, well, no, there's actually a lot of removal options in this deck, but one of the few removal-ish options in Emerald, sending Beast back to Alexandru's hand, saying, you're going to have to play it again if you want to draw that extra.
And I think we saw a really strong combo that Franklin just played. He uses the Mother Knows Best to put Tragic Beast back into hand. Alexandru doesn't have very many cards in hand, and then he sings Sudden Chill with Ursula Deceiver, forcing Alexandru to discard that Beast that was just sent back to your hand. So you might as well have banished the Beast at that point. And Alexandru is just playing off of the top of his deck, playing the Robin Hood, Also a Floodborn character that will force Franklin to discard a card with Bucky on board, but then using Bucky to banish the Captain Hook, it looks like.
Is Franklin's top decking here, I think, as well?
He might be. An Emerald Steel matchup, that wouldn't surprise me. Both characters discarding cards out of each other's hand. Neither one has been able to hit the Prince John, which is usually the engine to this deck to keep drawing cards when your opponent is discarding cards. We see Franklin pushing for more lore, regardless of the Robin Hood being on board as well. Robin Hood, when he challenges and banishes a character, will also gain 2 lore, which is a very strong ability because it allows you to both progress your win condition and gain control, a little bit of control back from the board. So I'm sure we will see him do that. We see Alexandru ink a card and play the Tinkerbell, which will deal 1 damage to everything. It won't end up banishing anything, but one of the nice things about this is Alexandru doesn't have any cards in hand, so now if he wants to challenge the Flynn Rider, he doesn't have to discard a card. He goes for the Ursula Deceiver, though, just taking the 1 damage for Robin Hood and passing the turn.
Yeah, Tinkerbell was maybe the perfect top deck there. I mean, we've highlighted her before. Not only does she do 1 damage across the board, but the bigger thing is she can 2-for-1 characters when she challenges. So prior to this, Franklin can quest with everything on board. Alexandru can only remove 1 per turn with his Robin Hood, but now Tinkerbell able to challenge, banish a character herself, and then use that extra 2 damage that she can deal to remove another character. So really preventing Franklin from questing out here.
Yeah, and Franklin doesn't have a great response to that Tinkerbell either, only drawing the Friar Tuck. Alexandru doesn't have any cards in hand. Franklin only had the Friar Tuck in hand, so when played, neither player will discard a card.
Goodness.
And wow, Alexandru gets another really great top deck.
It's 3 in a row.
Yeah, with the Beast Tragic Hero. So now Alexandru can start questing because Franklin doesn't really have characters on board that want to be challenging. Those Flint Riders want to be questing for 2 lore each because they have an ability that says when they are challenged, the opponent has to discard a card. And Franklin's characters just don't have a ton of strength, so Alexandru can continue to quest, and Franklin can't because of the Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, able to banish multiple characters in a turn, the Robin Hood being able to banish a character and continue to gain lore, and the Beast Tragic Hero being played immediately after that, allowing Alexandru to draw a card for turn. We see him play Hypnotize, which is an action that says that your opponent discards a card and then you draw a card. Franklin doesn't have any cards to discard, but it's still a way for Alexandru to draw a card. He's trying to put as much pressure on the board as he can and close out this game while Franklin is having a really tough time responding. Yeah,
this is a game where Alexandru's drawing everything he needs, all the strong characters, the Floodborn Beast Tragic Hero. Franklin last turn drew a sudden chill, not what he needed, and so sometimes the deck is on your side. The cards are with you.
Yeah, and it looks like Franklin is saying, let's just go to Game 3. So we have another Game 3 match on our hands. I absolutely love these. And, I mean, you can see how strong going first does. Even though Franklin was able to get a Ursula Deceiver of All in play, Alexandru just drew the cards that he needed to draw there at the very end to gain as much advantage and freeze Franklin's board state.
Mm-hmm. And you highlighted the Bucky. Come here, Pooh. We gotta. He's just blown away.
We gotta fix Pooh.
Yeah, he's just blown away by this matchup here. There you go, Pooh.
Poor Stitch is hidden.
Stitch is hanging on much better. Much better. No, I mean, you highlighted the Bucky engine early. That's something that Alexandru's trying to do, which I don't think we've seen a Bucky on the other side here, but got the Bucky engine going with the Floodborn, and yeah, another great match. I'm excited for match 3, or Game 3 rather.
Too. Yeah, Game 3. Let's go to it. Okay, it looks like Franklin is going to get to go first on this one since he lost the last game. And again, these players are playing for the Golden Mickey, so I think there's a lot on the line here. I definitely would be excited to be playing for this. We'll see how Franklin likes to open. I'm sure he'd like to open something like a Cursed Merfolk if he found it in his opening hand. Ends up inking a Robin Hood to play Robin Hood.
Into a Robin Hood.
Okay, there you go. This does open up some fun shift lines on turn 3 for Franklin. If he has a Floodborn Robin Hood in hand, he will be able to shift onto it, which is a pretty strong card in this matchup with Robin Hood champion of Sherwood's willpower, having 6 willpower, it can be a little bit difficult for Emerald Steel to deal with without something like an Ursula that can sing Strength of a Raging Fire twice. I also see a Prince John in Franklin's hand, which is one of the key cards you really want in this matchup. Again, being a card that just says when your opponent discards a card, you get to draw a card. It's a way that you can keep from happening what happened last game, where both players are just playing off of the top of their deck.
Yeah, absolutely. In this discard on discard matchup, any card you have that can give you a couple extra cards could give you the edge you need to win the game. Smee coming down on turn 2. Smee, a fantastic card. Great stat lines for turn 2, 3 strength, 3 willpower, and quest for 2 lore. But of course, when he's exerted at the end of your turn, he takes 1 damage if there's no captain on the board. Here, Ursula Deceiver coming down on turn 2. No songs, if I saw right. You know, anytime you're playing against an Emerald deck and you know Ursula Deceiver is available to your opponent, oftentimes when you rearrange your hand or you alter your hand, you send away those songs or ink them immediately because you'd rather them go to the bottom of your deck or in your inkwell than be discarded to no benefit. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happened here.
Yeah, and Franklin has an interesting thing to play here. He has quite a few options on his turn 3. He drew into an Ursula Deceiver of All. He also had the Prince John that he could play, but opts for the Robin Hood shift line, which I like for the reasons that I said earlier. It's a very aggressive play. Alexandru only has the Ursula Deceiver on board, which only has 1 strength, so it's going to be it's going to take quite a lot of challenging to get rid of that Robin Hood. But we see a response by Alexandru playing a Ursula Deceiver of All, and he has a Strength of a Raging Fire in his hand. So if Franklin can't banish this Ursula Deceiver of All this turn, I fully expect that Ursula to be seeing Strength of a Raging Fire very quickly to deal 6 damage to the Robin Hood.
It really is the only removal option available to this deck is that line of play. Robin Hood, fantastic stat line with 6 willpower. There's just not a lot to deal with it except for that double strength if you have the appropriate number of characters on the board. Or 1 strength if you have 6 characters on the board.
Yeah, and you certainly don't want to be challenging with 6 of your characters just to deal with Robin Hood, especially because the Robin Hood will draw a card if banished in a challenge, and if being banished through a card like Strength of a Raging Fire, you negate that from your opponent, which is also a really good thing. You don't want your opponent drawing any extra cards, especially in this discard versus discard match.
So here we go. Here's the Prince John you highlighted and the Merfolk. Now, Prince John, as you mentioned before, is a card that lets you draw a card every time your opponent discards a card. But I think importantly in this scenario, also has 2 lore. Franklin's managed to push the lore total up to 9 and is now showing 8 lore on the board. So perhaps Prince John, besides being a passive card draw engine here, will also serve to help Franklin get closer to the end game.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Alexandru's deck running the Buckies and a bunch of Floodborns, and I mentioned that there were other versions of Emerald Steel. It looks like Franklin is running the other version that doesn't run the Buckies and still runs some of the discard package, but tends to run a smaller, lower to the ground version of Emerald Steel, playing cards that have 2 lore, that can quest a little bit faster, be a little bit more aggressive, and that also discard cards like Cursed Merfolk and Flynn Rider paired with Prince John to keep your hand full. So we see Franklin doing that very well, already being up to 9 lore himself.
There we go. Prince John going to do work here, allowing Franklin to draw a card. Friar Tuck, because Alexandru has more cards in hand, forces him to discard a card where Friar Tuck's played. And that was an important play there. You know, before that, Franklin was on a couple cards in hand, 4 ink. Alexandru had about the same, so swinging it 1 card each way is definitely going to tip the scales a little bit. And sometimes in this game, those little tips of the scales, 1 card here, 1 card there, makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Every single card here matters, and especially I feel like the tipping point is really when you get your opponent down to 0 cards in hand. Not having any options and having to rely solely on the cards that you're drawing off the top of your deck is so much harder than having even just 1 or 2 options in hand to work with, whether you're inking those cards or playing those cards. And Alexandru does draw into
fantastic top deck.
Yeah, a really great top deck with Let the Storm Rage on. It's a card that Ursula will be able to sing. Unfortunately, Prince John has Ward, so even though Prince John has 2 willpower, theoretically, what you would like to do is banish both the Prince John and the Cursed Merfolk. Characters with Ward can't be chosen by opponents, so We see instead Alexandru will sing Let the Storm Rage On to deal a total of 4 damage to Friar Tuck, getting rid of Friar Tuck and drawing 2 cards in the process.
Yeah, that gets Chuler off the board. It does leave the Merfolk still in play, unless there's another action to remove the Merfolk. Challenging into the Merfolk is a little unpalatable at this point. Not only do you have to discard a card when you challenge the Cursed Merfolk, but with Prince John on the board, it would give Franklin another card. So you want to remove it, but you don't like to give your opponent that extra card. Of course, Jafar Dreadnought will also allow you to draw a card, negating that discard, but still.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really like about the Floodborn Jafar card is, although Alexandru will have to discard a card out of his hand, he gets to draw a card first before he has to discard this card. So at least he gets another option. And that's just sort of an order of operations for Disney Lorcana. Because Alexandru is the active player, the Jafar ability happens first before the Cursed Merfolk ability happens.
Yeah, and I think that's what the discussion here is about. I think you got the line of play right in Lorcana. You know, you think of these actions or these effects as a bag, and when you're the active player and there's these effects you have to resolve, you can choose which order you resolve them in. And so I think that's what we're discussing here, making sure that that Alexandru's allowed to draw that card off the Dreadnought before being forced to discard the card in the challenge, and I think that's correct.
It looks like Alexandru put the Ursula on the top of the deck and decided to discard one of the 2 cards out of his hand anyway. That may be a wording thing on the cards. I have to look at what Cursed Merfolk says versus Jafar Dreadnought. Cursed Merfolk might actually say when challenged you have to discard a card, and Jafar doesn't draw a card until a character is banished.
You know, I think you may have that right.
If that's the case, then the Cursed Merfolk trigger has to happen before the Jafar Dreadnought
because the
trigger
act of
happens.
challenging before the banish. No, I think that's correct. And of course, you know, Twitch chat is telling us exactly what's going on here right now. But you know, I think that's correct. So that's what that discussion was about, and I think it looks like it was resolved correctly.
Yeah, and we see Franklin deciding to play Let the Storm Rage On onto the Tragic Beast because Tragic Beast is letting Alexandru draw an extra card at the start of every turn so long as he's not damaged. So the Let the Storm Rage On is not going to banish the Beast Tragic Hero on its own, but it will stop Alexandru from gaining extra cards every turn.
Absolutely.
Both players are not working with very many cards in their hands. It looks like Franklin had a Strength of a Raging Fire and a Sudden Chill in his hand, plus something else. Decides to ink the Strength of a Raging Fire, play the Ursula Deceiver Ball just to see what is in Alexandru's 2-card hand. Of course, there's no songs. There's a Ursula Deceiver Ball and a Robin Hood. But at least Franklin is able to develop a character, and Alexandru has a decent board state here in that he has the Jafar Dreadnought on board, which means that Franklin doesn't really want to exert any of his characters, because if he exerts the Prince John or the Ursula Deceiver, the Jafar Dreadnought can challenge it and then draw a card once that card is banished. So we also have another card that likes to challenge, Robin Hood being played, that will gain 2 lore when he challenges and banishes a character as well.
Yeah, this is a difficult board state for Franklin to deal with. There's not a lot that deals a lot of damage in this deck, other than double Strength of Raging Fire or Strength of Raging Fire if you have the board set up for it. So Robin Hood with its 6 willpower, Jafar with 4, and then Beast. Well, Beast has a couple left. It's just a lot to deal with. And so Alexandru now able to push his lore a little bit. There goes the rest of his hand with the Sudden Chill being played. Although Franklin has pushed the lore lead a little bit here, so this game is kind of on a knife's edge, I feel like.
Yeah, Franklin is just sort of locked out of doing anything right now because of all of the characters on Alexandru's part of the board. But one of the interesting things about an Emerald Steel matchup, and we talk a lot about our Amethyst matchups, how they're able to gain lore immediately, and we've seen in Sapphire just how strong a card like Lucky Dime is, because it also allows you to gain lore immediately, and it's not a way that your opponent can really interact with you or stop it from happening. Emerald Steel doesn't really have that ability. There aren't any cards in either of these ink colors that allow them to gain lore instantly, so this matchup has to be won purely through board state. It has to be won through characters being played and questing, and we see Alexandru having the better board state is setting himself up to start questing with all these characters, catching back up to the lead that Franklin has had with 11 lore already, and he might be able to catch up just in time, except Oh my goodness. Okay, we see
We
a
have not seen this card yet.
Yeah, we see a Flynn Rider. This is a Floodborn evasive card that starts with 4 lore. That is a ton of lore. And he loses a lore for every card in your opponent's hand, which is a great card in a deck that is discarding all of your cards in your opponent's hand.
And a point in the game where your opponent has nothing in hand. This is, I mean, the key word here that you highlighted at the very front is evasive right now. If it can quest even for 2 or 3 lore each turn, but Alexandru can't remove it because there's nothing on the board with evasive, or probably no characters in his deck with evasive. Maybe a Prince John.
No, I wouldn't think so. I don't think there's anything that's going to have evasive.
No, nothing. Prince John with ward. So really, it's the removal that we'd need. This is an interesting play.
Yeah, it's the only answers that Alexandru should have is removal actions, to be honest with you. And this puts Alexandru in a weird spot where he's drawing a card, but he doesn't really want to play it because every time he plays it, he's going to give Flynn Rider that extra lore. He does decide to play a Tragic Beast because Tragic Beast will help him draw extra cards every turn. And Alexandru says, I'm just going to race you at this point. I know that the Flynn Rider is going to be questing for a ton of lore. We talked a lot about how Jafar Dreadnought and Robin Hood are great for challenging, and Flynn Rider just gets around that, like you said, because of the evasive. Flynn Rider is able to freely quest for 4 lore every turn, and it's coming down to the races at this point. Franklin decides to play the Friar Tuck, even though that means he's going to have to discard a card on his own because he's just trying to push this lore as fast as he can and finish the game off before Alexandru can catch up. And yeah, Franklin has the game, taking game 3. Alexandru doesn't draw into any cards to get rid of that Flynn Rider, and he knows that Franklin's going to beat him to 20 before he can get there.
I did not see that Flynn Rider coming.
I think it was a great tech card in this deck for this reason, specifically in these mirror matchups, and honestly in the other matchups. If you can get your opponent to not have any cards in hand, it is a great ender to the game. Like I said, there aren't any ways that Emerald or Steel can close out a game immediately like Merlin Goats can or Lucky Dimes can. So being able to play this, and it's a card that it's really just hard to deal with because of the evasive. It can't be challenged, and your opponent just has to hope that they have some sort of removal action that they can play to get rid of it, and we saw Alexandru didn't have it.
Certainly closed the game down for Franklin there. What a great game, back and forth, and gosh, what an awesome finish.
Yeah, so Franklin moves on into the top 8, earning himself the Golden Mickey serialized card. I would be very happy to be Franklin right now.
I don't know about you, but I'm going to go get a look at those in person later because I want to see what they look like.
Yeah, me too. So we want to go see those. This is going to go to a break and to a winner's interview, and then we'll be back, so don't go anywhere.
Hey everybody, back on the floor with Alexandru yet again, and you just won probably the biggest match here in Lorcana. Not only have you qualified for the North American Championships after winning last round, now you've secured one of those golden Mickeys. How are you feeling right now?
I'm pumped, really. Like I'm almost getting a bit emotional right now. Like it's the first time for me like winning that much. It's amazing.
Yeah, just gotta like harp on that a little bit. You were talking to me about this, that you're a big card game fan. You have been your whole life. You've watched coverage a ton of other games that have gone on and of this one. And this is one of the first times you've been in this situation. You've always been at home rooting for your friends or watching for your friends, and now that it's happening to you, does it mean that much more to you because of that?
It does. It's being in that position just amazing. Like I can kind of feel now what those other players felt. Like I'm really good friends with pro players of other games, and like now I feel what they feel, and like man, this is amazing. It's just very cool.
It's really cool. It's actually fun to watch too, for y'all to see y'all like realize this dream and stuff. So look, best of luck the rest of the day, but I think you could have a little bit of a moment to yourself to really be happy that you've accomplished the biggest goals in this game so far.
I'm taking a breather right now. I'm just like
all right, buddy, well, best of luck in the rest of the top 8.
Thank you very much.